Welcome back. I'm Melisa Idris. With me, Dr. Carl Benedikt Frey. We're looking at the future of work. Now, essentially, you mentioned before the break that 47% of jobs will be automated in the future. How far in the future are we talking about?
Right. So we're not saying that 47% of jobs will be automated, because that would be very technologically deterministic. So what we're suggesting is that the potential scope of automation has expanded very rapidly in recent years due to advances in machine learning, subsets of artificial intelligence, mobile robotics, and so on. But the potential scope of automation is quite different from the pace of technology adoption. And
potential scope of automation is different from the pace of adoption.
Right,
okay.
exactly, right. So from a technological capabilities point of view, a lot of jobs are potentially automatable, but there are a lot of factors beyond technological capabilities that drive decisions to automate, right? So if you go to a country like Japan, you find that Nissan, they're uses a lot of robots in production when they produce cars. When they do the same thing in India, they rely more heavily on cheap labor, so relative cost between capital and labor matter. Even if Google Translate was to become perfect tomorrow, when you want an official document to be translated, it needs to be certified by a translator to be valid. Right. So unless we certify Google Translate, it's not going to be adopted on broader scale. And in addition to that, culture norms matter. So in Japan, robots are already being used in elderly care. In Sweden, where I'm from, there will probably be an outcry if and when that happens.
Okay, so the culture matters too.
I think so, yes.
As you mentioned, the attitudes towards technology, right? So in your line of work, when you have to explain to people about, the rise of the pace of adoption for automation, do you find that the fear of losing jobs, the fear of automation taking over human jobs, is that real? Is the fear real?
I think so, but I think it also diverges across space. So when I go to the US, people seem terrified. When I go home to Sweden, there seems to be a lot less concern. And I think, if you lose your job in Sweden, it's probably less worse than in the US, because you don't lose your health insurance with it, for example. So there are some geographical differences, but there is also a lot of anxiety about automation. And one of the sort of key things that struck me when researching the book is that how much technology has progressed over the centuries, but how little the debate surrounding its effects has actually progressed. So we have these sort of periods of automation anxiety over and over again, and this time as well, it's very real.
So what do you mean that the debates have not progressed? Are there gaps in the way we're talking about it? Are we not thinking about the effects of automation correctly?
Yes, I think so in part, but I think, there are two sort of ways of seeing it. So, there's overall welfare sort of society perspective in which, societies grow wealthier by adopting those technologies, right?
Sure.
Some people individually is not going to be better off due to technology adoption, and we see that particularly in manufacturing industry, cities that have deindustrialized either because of globalization or automation have seen sort of persistent increases in joblessness and a lot of sort of bad social consequences associated with that. Right. So increases in crime, increases in suicide rates, deteriorating public services, faltering marriage rates. And economists tend to think that the purpose of production is consumption, but people actually put a lot of meaning to their work. So I think that sort of the individual consequences from automation and the anxiety surrounding that is very real for many people.
Sure. All right. So let's talk about, I guess, looking at how automation and machine learning will threaten jobs of the future. So robots perhaps taking over manual work, artificial intelligence perhaps taking over certain jobs that previously required a brain. So what is then left for human work? Where do you see the role of humans? You mentioned, Google Translate, someone, I guess, checking that document once again, verifying that document. But what's left for human work then, if we take into account the adoption of all these technological automations?
So there are several domains in which machines still perform very poorly. One is complex social interactions, right? And I think the state of the art there is best described by Turing test competitions, where chatbots try to convince human judges of them being a person.
Yes.
And some people have argued that was a breakthrough 3 years ago when one chatbot managed to convince 30% of judges of it being a person. But it did so by pretending to be a 13-year-old Russian orphan boy speaking English as his second language with no understanding of English culture. And if you think about the variety of much more complex social interactions that we do in our daily jobs, we try to motivate the people around us, we try to persuade people that we're right, and so on and so forth. It's almost inconceivable that we will see machines outperforming us in those domains. I think the same goes for creativity. So the people argue, and there's a big debate about this in the machine learning community, whether machines can be creative. And maybe sometimes they will, but I think they're very far from being creative. I think most people that argue that machines are creative today conflate novelty with creativity. So I could draw something here on the table and call myself an artist, but few people would be likely to buy it. And I think the challenging part is to create something that's novel that also makes sense.
Okay, all right. So I guess jobs with creativity, jobs that require I guess human interaction will be work of the future, but that is very limited, right? So do you think there will be new roles opening up, roles that we haven't even considered in the past?
Absolutely. So I mean, if you were to go back to 1900 and ask your great-grandparents, right, what do you think that,
jobs
future
of the
generations
future will be like?
They wouldn't say, my son is probably going to be a hot yoga instructor, my daughter is going to be a software engineer, right? And I think in
drone operator.
Exactly, artificial intelligence auditor. So I think that we are similarly ill-placed to sort of conceive what the jobs of the future will be. It's a lot easier to predict what chunk of current jobs are potentially automatable than seeing the jobs of the future.
Understood. All right. After this, we're going to come back and take a look at the role of education in preparing for ourselves for work of the future. Stay tuned to Astro AWANI.